So in this exercise, we're gonna go through the render layer again, but this time it's slightly different. So if you notice the camera, right, it's a little bit different angle, and if you do a render layer on the master layer, you'll get something like this, and you can see there's a shadow on the ground. Okay, so that's what makes this exercise is a bit different from the previous one. Okay, and this can be slightly a bit harder. Okay, now, so how do we approach this is that again, the camera is not moving and only the character is moving. Okay, and again, if you observe the scene and do a test, right, like this, every time the character moves, the position of the shadow is also moving. Okay, so that's something that you have to take a consideration. Now, let's just do another setup, right? So I'm going to select everything in here, right click, okay, and let's call this BG for the background. And again, because the camera is not moving, I'm just going to reuse or re-render the camera one time only. And again, I'm going to use the same method as the previous one, right? Go to the BG, Control A, and I'm going to turn off, or not turn off, create override for the character. And you watch what happens when I do this. Okay, so if I render using the previous setting, you notice the character is not there. Okay, and if I go to master layer, the character is there. Now, one thing you have to be concerned is the shadow. Okay, so whenever the camera is moving, or not the camera, like the character is moving, the shadow is also moving, and that shadow is rendered in the background layer, which is incorrect, right? Because if you only render this one time when the character is here, right, the shadow is going to be there. Okay, but when the character is moving here, right, if you only render the background one time, then the shadow get left behind and still over there. Okay, so this is incorrect. So how do we approach this? Okay, so again, we need to separate the shadow layer on its own. Okay, so you have your character layer, right, and you have your background layer, and then you have your shadow layer on its own. Okay, so we're gonna need like 3 different layers. Now, the background itself, let's just leave it as it is. I mean, an easy way is that you can just hide the character, right? It'll be easy, and if you do render, it'll be clean. But for the sake of these demonstration purposes, I'm just going to use the layer override. Okay, so in this case, I'm gonna right click and then like create override and untick. Okay, and if I do a render, I'll get something like that. Okay, so that's cool. And again, I want to move on to my character. So for character, I'm just going to select the character and the light. Okay, and I rename this. And if I render, I think that's okay. Okay, everything is okay. Now, the next one will be the shadow. So I'm going to right click and select everything and just make a duplicate called the shadow. Right, so right now shadow is exactly the same as master layer, and if I render, this is what shadow looks like. Okay, now, so how do we deal with just capturing the shadow on its own? Now, in Redshift, there is this thing called shadow catcher material. So what it does is when you apply that material to the object, right, it will capture its shadow. So you will receive the shadow information when there's light present in the scene. Okay, now, there are 2 ways to do it. You can select everything in the object, right, and just assign the material of the shadow catcher. Alright, this one, right, Shift Matte Shadow Catcher. Okay, or you can just right click and then create a material override. So override, I'm going to create new material override. And again, by using this override, it means that only a certain that material will be assigned to that particular layer. So when you're switching to a different layer, they will use the original material. Okay, so I think it's a neat, handy way without having to worry about like, do I assign like incorrectly the material? Because if you assign a material here in the master layer, and the whole thing will become that material. Okay, so if you're using override, that means like only that material are being assigned to that particular layer that you selected. Okay, so that's a good thing about the override. Okay, so I'm using this right, create, and that one. Okay, now if you switch, right, the master layer and all the other layer are still using the correct material. Okay, only this one is being overwritten in terms of the material. Okay, so I'm going to press Ctrl A, and if you look at the material attributes, okay, so this is what shadow catcher attribute does. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that everything is black. Okay, everything is black, and if I render, right, it seems like there's nothing there, right? But when you look at the alpha, there is some information here. So all the white portion, it's indicating that it's the shadow. Okay, just like what you have if you render. Okay, so let's go back to master layer. Okay, so all these are shadow, and if I go back to the shadow layer, okay, so they both are matching with the master layer, so all the shadow are in the proper places. Okay, so go back this one, there you go. Okay, so that's the information that we want. Now again, as I mentioned before, the render layer works with only batch render. So if you try to save this image, right, individually, you might not get the alpha. Okay, because what we want is, we want just this shadow information. We don't want the black, so the black should be transparent. So if you save manually, you might not get the transparency that you want. Okay, so what I would do is that I would do a batch render. Okay, now I don't want to render the animation because it's pretty much the same, right? You can do this later on your own. So I'm just going to do a single render. So I want to turn on all these layers, right? The background, the character, and the shadow. Okay, and I go to my render setting, and I remove my animation. Okay, turn off, and then I right click. Okay, render layer, so it will have the proper name. It will follow this shadow, character, and BG. Okay, and I just want to do one single frame render, right? And I change the file format to TIFF and turn off the default light. Okay, so let's do a batch render for it. Render and batch render. Okay, so this will go through the layer individually. Okay, and make sure this is turned on. Now, if you go to your image folder, so this is what the layer look like. Okay, I think by default the master layer will always be rendered. Okay, so it doesn't matter, so we can compare the result. Now, so we're going to open up all these in Photoshop. So I want to go to File, but I'm going to stack all the picture in one file, so it's much easier, right? I want to stack all the files in a single image. Okay, so I want to load the whole thing. Press OK. Yep, everything will be loaded into a single file, and just press OK. Okay, so let Photoshop do its thing. Now I'm going to put the mask layer on the top. Okay, background on the bottom. Now I think I the mask layer like it was from previous testing. So I'm going to delete and just make sure I re-render the whole thing again properly. Okay, so this one will be rendered again. Okay, everything seems okay. Go back to, go back to Photoshop, and I'm going to load again the whole thing. Okay, I think the mask layer is not rendered properly because I was doing the testing before I do this video. So now I'm re-rendering the whole thing, and everything should be in the correct position. Okay, now that everything is loaded, I'm going to rearrange the layer. So mask layer should be on the top, the BG at the background, and if you switch, everything should be okay, right? Everything should be in order, right? This is the character, this is my shadow, and this is the background. Now, if you notice that when you compare the composited image with the mask layer, right, there is a slightly different in terms of the shadow color. Okay, so this is something that I'm trying to get it right, but I haven't got the solution yet. Okay, I think the result of the composited shadow will always be darker as compared to the mask layer. Okay, but that's okay because at the end of the day you can always tweak it, okay, to how much darker the shadow is going to be. I think it should be about 40% or 60%, right? And if you compare, there is a slight difference. Okay, this difference still there, but it's not that much. And number two, you're going to do a color composite anyway, so the whole thing will be changed in terms of the color and in terms of the shadow color, right, as compared to the mask layer. Okay, so it's I think this issue is still caused by the latest Redshift version, and I hope they fix it in a newer version. Okay, so this is how you composite using a render layer in Maya. Now again, things can be quite challenging, especially when the character is moving and in the front of the character there is an object. Okay, let's say there's a rock. Okay, and then like the character comes behind the rock, right, and then like comes out again. Okay, and here there might be a trees or a leaf. Okay, so things like this can pose like quite challenging. Okay, depending on the scene and the lighting as well. So as the scene gets more complex, the setup for the rendering layer will also gets more challenging. Okay, but if you use this properly, the render stat, you should be able to tackle that problem. Okay, and the layer override.